Cool. Hey, Pao. Hey, Diana.
Hey, Kirah. How's it going?
Thanks for
Hey.
joining me this morning. Let's see, it's Friday, February 12th, 2021. I'm in LA. We have Pao and Diana here with us to talk about angular houses. I'm really stoked. Kicking off our houses series with a discussion about, I wouldn't say they're the most important houses, but they're definitely the most like prominent ones that show up in the chart. So I'm excited to get into it. But to start, let's do some intros. Pao, this is your first time on the show. Um, would you mind sharing your SMR if you're comfortable and talk a little bit about your practice and how you use astrology?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. So yeah, my name is Pao. My SMR are Leo Sun, Taurus Moon, and Taurus Rising. And as for my astrology practice, I am a professional astrologer. My readings are currently closed right now. I just kind of needed a little bit of a break. But when they do open again, I do natal chart readings and solar return chart readings. And I mostly practice traditional astrology. And I've been practicing now for like a couple of years, but I think my interest in astrology dated back to even when I was like a kid. My mom's like always been interested in the occult and has like studied everything from like Western astrology, Chinese astrology, feng shui, like everything you could possibly think of. And so I started reading her books as a kid and picked it all back up like, a few years ago. So I
That's
think that's just a
amazing.
gist of it.
Awesome. Cool. Um, Diana, welcome back. Whatever, like
Hi.
how many of you I'm like, have you've been on
There's
the
the
Venus
Venus episode,
episode
the nodes
and
episode,
which one was it?
the
The
nodes.
notes. Okay, yes. And that
So I
was
think just
like
two.
just those two. Okay. I
Yeah.
just like see you. I feel like I'm like see you between this, fresh voices, all the things. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, would you mind sharing your SMR again and telling us a little bit about
Mhm.
you and your practice?
Yeah, so I have a Sagittarius sun and a Sagittarius moon with a Capricorn rising. And my practice, every time I talk about my practice, I'm like, oh, what do I even say? Um, I am rooted in the fundamentals of traditional astrology, but I apply aspects of like counseling astrology that comes from more contemporary variants of the art, I guess. And in my practice, I really focus on assisting people with kind of re-enchanting their lives. And that includes re-enchanting their relationship with themselves as reflected through their natal charts. So a lot of my work is rooted in natal astrology. I will do like solar return stuff. I love timing techniques a lot. I also do mentorship and like tutoring with a small group of people. I really love working with people regularly. Like I have a handful of clients that I see every single month, and that's amazing and wonderful. I love it. Um, and beyond my like one-on-one client practice, I also do a decent amount of writing these days. Like right now, as we're recording, one of my main projects is actually writing a guidebook for a tarot deck that a friend of mine designed. Tarot is my first divinatory love, and that influences my astrological practice in interesting ways. Um, yeah, I don't know what else to say about it at this point.
Awesome.
Mercury retrograde.
Mercury, yeah. Okay, so we're recording this right now in the middle of a Mercury retrograde, and we're having slight technical difficulties, but we're here. We're, we got it. Hopefully it'll even out. Um, cool. All right, and then, I mean, how we know each other. Diana and I, we met at where I met everyone I know, apparently, at NORAC 2019, day one, night one. Um, and we've been friends ever since. And
Mhm.
I guess we just met through Twitter.
Yeah, that's also how I know Pao. It's just straight up Astro Twitter.
And Pao, Pao, I don't know if Pao can even hear us right now. And yeah, I know Pao through Twitter, right?
Yeah, I know both of you through Astro
Through
Twitter.
Twitter. I mean, we never met IRL yet, but it'll happen. You did get to see Bear though, right?
No, unfortunately I didn't. It was such a bummer because it was a year ago, last March. I had a flight booked for the Bay Area already. Like we all had it all planned out, and then the pandemic hit like a week before I was supposed to fly out.
Damn.
Wow.
Well,
Wow,
it'll
you could have
happen.
gotten stuck in California.
I mean, but stuck in
Well.
California, stuck in Hawaii.
Yeah.
How you're in Hawaii, right? What island are you on?
I'm on Oahu, which is where Honolulu is, which is it's the capital city. It's the biggest city.
Sweet. I can't wait to come visit sometime. My Mercury line runs through the Big Island, and I've been to Oahu a bunch of times, but I haven't been there yet. So I'm like, let's check out that Mercury ascendant line. That might be interesting.
Yeah.
That would be interesting. On Big Island's really, really nice. It's a lot quieter than Oahu, and can see volcanoes. And there's apparently I think it's at least 22 different subclimates on the Big Island alone. So you get everything from rainforest to desert to tundra, and then of course tropical.
Wow.
Oh my God.
I had
I
no
want to
idea.
go there.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Astro field trip. Cool. Let's get into the houses. Let's get into the angular houses. First, I wanted to start out by just defining angularity, and talk about angular houses, we're speaking about the first house, the fourth house, the seventh house, and the 10th house. And yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about why these four houses are so important in the chart. Traditional meanings of the angular houses in general. So does anyone want to start out?
Well, I feel like the main thing with angular houses is they're the loudest houses in the chart. Like this is something you were kind of talking about right at the beginning, I feel like, of just how, angular houses aren't necessarily the most important, but they are the noisiest. Like things that you have in angular houses are going to be noticeable, gaudy, even ostentatious. They're ostentatious aspects of the chart. So they can feel more urgent, even if they're not always the most important, whatever your question might be as you're turning to your chart.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I agree. Yeah, they're definitely the loudest houses, both in your natal chart as well as when you're watching the transits. If you have planets transiting through the angles, you'll likely feel those transits a lot more than going through your cadent or succedent houses. And I've been thinking, you hear that a lot in astrology. Oh, that the angular houses are so loud. And as we were preparing for this podcast, I was thinking about why. And I think the angles are, in a lot of ways, just how we present ourselves to the world and how we show up in the world. And then also just how the world affects us and impacts us as well.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the ways I sometimes describe the angles themselves, which give us a lot of our insight into angular houses, the angles themselves as cosmic slip and slide wormholes, where your expression externally and the universe or the world around you's influence from the external to the internal is really strongly facilitated. It's a direct line instead of a more indirect line going either direction.
Yeah, I love that. To kind of speak about the way I like to speak about the angular houses is they are the tent poles of the chart. Well, I guess the angles are, but we can talk about later how not all angles are in the angular houses. But yeah, so they represent sort of these tent poles or the stakes of a chart, what kind of holds it together. So I also like to talk about them as like pivot points. These are where the angles, the ascendant being the beginning where the eastern horizon is, and then the descendant being the western horizon. These are points where pivots happen, changes happen. So the sun rises and the sun sets at these points. Same with the midheaven and the IC. We get where the sun or where planets culminate above the earth, and then what's the opposite of culmination?
Anti-culminate.
Anti-culminate, thank you. Underneath the earth at the IC. So we get these pivot points. And you can also think of them as like, changing direction even. And yeah, that's part of the reason why they are so loud. And, planets at angles or in angular houses or transits, they will sort of bring in change of some, well, I guess transits will sort of bring in change that is more directly felt in the life. I like to say it's like you can reach out and touch it, like it's more tangible, as opposed to like something happening in a succeedant house might be a little bit more like behind the scenes or internally felt, or just not as like pivotal. It might not show up as such a pivotal change. Yeah, do you guys have any other things to add about angular houses in general? Yeah,
No.
let's dive into the first house then. So just so my audience knows, like there's a reason why I asked both of these people to come in and talk about the angular houses, because all three of us are pretty like angular people. But both Pao and Diana have first house planets. I do not. So I'm excited to get their perspectives on the first house and having planets in the first. But to start off, let's just talk about the first house in general and traditional significations of the first house. Yeah. Pao, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I think this episode's timely because I had just tweeted yesterday about how the planetary joys have helped me understand the houses so much more. And just to explain to everyone, the planetary joys are each planet has a house that it quote unquote joys in. I think another better way to put it is like it's like the planet's like favorite house to be in, and I think one of the houses that I like just really increased my understanding of that is that Mercury joys in the first house. And I think that I had to really kind of mull that over for a while. I'm like, why does Mercury really like to be in the first house? And I think it's because the first house represents ourselves, like our identities, and there's just so much duality and beyond in that. And I think Mercury just like perfectly encompasses that constant flux in our identity. And so yeah, the first house is that. It's also like it could be part of our identity too is like our physical body and appearance and the way we express our identities that way. And so one of the ways that the first house was traditionally called, with Hellenistic astrologers, was the helm, like the helm of the ship. So it also kind of represents like our life direction as well. So I think that's just a few kind of keywords for the first house.
Yeah, I love that that reflection about Mercury being, just our identities being so what's the word you use? Because it was really good. I don't want to say mutable, but like dualistic, like there's so much duality to who we are. And I never thought of it that way. I love that. I think when it comes to Mercury having rejoicing in the first house, part of the way you can think about that is like Mercury can only be seen at these pivot points with sunrise and sunset. So Mercury, yeah, like if Mercury joying in the rejoicing in the first house, you can kind of imagine like early morning star Mercury like peering up right before sunrise. And that's like the only time it can really be seen in a quote unquote morning sky or a day sky is like right before sunrise, or at sunset, like right after sunset. So that's part of the reason why Mercury will prefer an angular house like the first or seventh, but I think the first especially. Yeah, it's the beginning. Diana, do you have thoughts about the first house?
Yeah, one of the things that I like to emphasize about the first house and, the sign of the ascendant, like it points you towards your like natural and learned embodiment of being alive, like what matters for your just basic embodiment, and also how you move through the world in a way that ideally facilitates your ongoing beingness. So, the first house can also talk to us about our survival strategies and our coping mechanisms. Um, what we've learned to, again, embody in order to assure our continuance. And that, like going back to, Mercury rejoicing in the first, like Mercury is highly adaptable. And even if you have like a fixed sign rising, like your embodiment, like your learned embodiment, is something that has come about as an adaptation to having to interface with the world. So I feel like, the first house can really point to, what is our primary methodology for interacting with the rest of existence. So
That's lovely. Yeah.
yeah.
To sort of piggyback off of that, my very Pisces rising way of talking about the first house is, I like to say it's your vibe. It's like it's the energy that you bring into a space. And yeah, it's the beginning. And by that I mean it is the eastern horizon point is where the first house begins in quadrant systems. But regardless, that ascendant degree is so important in astrology. And yeah, it represents where heaven meets earth, where sky meets earth. You can also think of that where spirit meets matter, right? So it's that, and that's what was rising on the east at the time that you took your first breath and sort of individuated and became, a separate human separate from, the person that gave birth to you. So the first house does represent, that intersection between mind and body, or spirit and matter. And that shows up in like your physical form. And again, the energy that you bring into a space, that vibe that you give off. And that's also the vibe that you just like live your life on. It's like the first house is so much about your body and what you look like in your appearance, but it's also sort of that the general like energy that your life like runs on. It's like that frequency. um yeah, I'm trying to think about, so yeah, the first house appearance is a big part of it. And folks will say, by folks I mean, you might read this online, that the first house or the ascendant is like your mask. I think a lot of professional astrologers like don't like that don't like that term, because mask seems like something that you put on, and that it's not necessarily like the real you. It's like something that's not, that you just like wear. But that's not the case really when it comes to the ascendant. Like it literally is you. It's your identity. It's just the most like external parts of you in a lot of ways. And by external, like that literally means like your skin, like what you're wearing, how you adorn yourself. And again, that energy that you're meeting people with, it's just like that vibe.
Yeah,
you,
I have a
you
lot
guys
of
have
strong feelings about the like the
about the
first house being
mask.
described as our mat. Yeah, I
Yeah.
disagree with it. I would argue actually that out of all of the 12 houses in our chart, the first house is really the only one that's like 100% us.
Yes.
It's like, other houses could be other people, right? Like we'll talk about the seventh house, but the seventh house could be people we're in close relationship. The 10th house could be our boss, but the first house is like 100% you. So how in the world is that like your math?
Yeah, it's always you. It's never anyone else. The first house. Yeah, I love that. Um, you both have first house planets. Pao, your moon is in the first, which is also your sect light, right? And then Diana, you have a lot of first house planets.
That I have Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, and Venus all in the first house,
Wow.
as well as a couple of asteroids, like non major asteroids, and two of my hermetic lots.
Wow.
Yeah, very heavy on the first house here.
Yeah, do you guys have like thoughts about, like, I don't know what it's like to have planets in the first house. I mean, like, I know I can delineate it, but like, yeah, how do you feel like that shows up for you in terms of just like, yeah, having planets there?
One of the ways that I describe it is when you have planets in the first, and especially like the closer they get to the ascendant, like especially the planets that are within like five degrees of the ascendant, especially, you become an avatar of that planet. And so if you have multiple planets in the first house, you become like a multiform avatar for these like celestial entities or like these celestial ideas. So for me, the thing that is closest to my ascendant in terms of planets, not asteroids, because I have a couple of asteroids that are like right there. The planet that's closest to the ascendant for me is Uranus. And so I show up as Uranus in a lot of different circumstances. And I kind of serve the aims of Uranus in interesting ways, like through the lens of Capricorn, like through the auspices of Saturn and Capricorn, right? Like Saturn remains the boss, but yeah, like whenever I see somebody that has like a high concentration of planets in the first house, I'm like, so part of your being, like part of you learning how to be yourself or like embody yourself in as clear a way as possible is sorting out the intersections of these planets and allowing space for all of these planets to be part of your identity, part of how you show up. Yeah, that's a main way that I think about it.
I mean, that makes sense. To me, like, you are Saturn incarnate.
I mean, Saturn is the most dignified planet and the most prominent planet in my chart. So
Yeah. It's interesting, and we'll talk about it when we get to the seventh house, but your Saturn is also influenced by like, benefic of sex. That's like, opposite it and stuff. But yeah, when I see people with a lot of planets in their first, the first word that comes to mind is just like personality. It's just like lots of different, if the first house is like that energy that you're like entering a room with, it's like you have a lot of planets in your first house, like you're entering with like a lot of different energies, that's like when people are encountering you, they're encountering a lot, like, and that's not to say that like people planets in the first are like a lot or too much or anything, but it's like you're encountering all these different like pieces of someone, almost like all at once, sort of kind of packaged up in that way. And it can be really cool to see like the how big someone's personality can be, given all these different planets. I'm thinking of one person who has like almost all their planets in the first house in Scorpio, and she's just like one of those people I'm like, oh, you're the next Oprah. Like, just like so much personality, so much, just like they're just giving you everything, all of themselves, like at once. Yeah, I love that. And yeah, planets on the ascendant especially are like extra loud. You can picture it, like that planet rising on the east, at the time of birth. And so its presence is just more loud, more like, deeply felt and known. Pao, how about you with Luna in the first?
Yeah, I guess before talking about my moon, I wanted to just kind of comment on the points like you all just made. Like I have a lot of first house people in my life. Like my sister has 4 planets in Pisces in her first house, plus her lot of fortune.
Wow.
And then I date a lot of first house people. Like it's like we tend to, I think it naturally tend to attract each other. And so, but yeah, I do definitely see the multi-personalities, like with my own sister, and I'm gonna be careful what I say because she's probably gonna listen to this, but she has a big personality, but she also has Saturn exactly on her ascendant, and it's really interesting too. She'll also kind of choose, what to show, right? Like she kind of has, she's a Pisces rising. She kind of has like a classic like IG influencer, like type IG, but since she's my sister, I know she's like so much more than like what she shows like on her like IG account, right? But anyway, I mean, back to like my moon in the first house. It's funny because when I first started learning astrology, like many of us, we pulled up our charts on like some free thing, and Placidus was the default house setting. And in Placidus, I am a 12th house moon. And when I first started learning about astrology too, I also just kind of, my definition of the moon is like, oh, it's just your emotions. It's like your emotional self. And to me, being a 12th house moon made like perfect sense because I don't really like see myself as like an emotional person. I really like don't wear my heart on my sleeve. And then I switched the whole signs and found out I was a first house moon. And it like, that was the hardest thing actually for me to reconcile when I first changed the whole signs, was like, I could not picture myself as like this first house moon. Now that I really thought about it, I think a lot of me like this, being a little guarded at first is just being a Taurus rising. It has like nothing to do with like being a 12th or first house moon. But yeah, now that I've had a deepen my understanding of like what the moon is, like, yeah, it is our emotions, but it is also just like physical like selves as well. Like in like, it makes perfect sense that I'm a first house moon, right? Like, I think a lot of people know me as not just an astrologer and a community organizer, but as a power lifter, and that taking care of my body is like really, really important to me and a really important part of like who I am. So,
and it's an exalted moon too. So it's like it has more capability to like put into like, I'm going to make this body like the best body I can make it.
Right. And I mean, the other thing about like being like a first house Taurus moon is out of all of my like, my big three, my SMR, I identify the strongest and the loudest with my Taurus moon. And it is also my sect light too. So all of the stereotypes for the Taurus moon, like I feel like I fully identify them. Like I love sleeping. I love eating. Like I love just like all of this stereotypical.
So jealous.
Like I love your tweets about Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah.
Like, it's been hard lately because I haven't been able to eat dairy for like almost a year. But I like live vicariously through your Ben and Jerry's tweets.
Yeah. Something I've noticed a lot about people who have moon in the first is that, especially when it's your sect light, but is that you just attract people and like just people. And I don't know if this is your experience or not, but I've talked to a lot of folks with moon in the first who, especially pre-COVID, like would just get randos coming up to them all the time because it's just like you have a light, like you are embodying this light, and it's like in your first house. So people are drawn to light, like anyone's drawn to light, right? Especially like a warm, exalted Taurus moonlight, and so I'm curious if that's been your experience, that people, like regardless of whatever energy you think you're putting out, people are just like kind of gravitate to you, or like just like once, like I don't know, just want to be in your presence.
Yeah, I'll tell this story, and I hope it doesn't sound too kind of braggy, but I was just at a protest around prison abolition, and I brought the guy that I'm dating, and this is our first time like going in action together, and so we went, and then like when it ended, like yeah, people were kind of coming up to me and like wanting to talk to me, and as we were leaving, he was like, "You're a really warm person," and when I would see these people talk to you and you talking to them, like I could just see like how felt and heard and appreciated they were. Like you were remembering, like as you're introducing them, you remembered exactly when you met them before and how you know them and like what they're up to. And he was like, you just remembered all these details. And he was like, I could see how like just happy people felt just being around you. And I was just like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's like an attractiveness where you're going to be reflected in a nourishing way.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very nourishing. I mean, that's so not even just solar people, because you are obviously also a solar person, which we'll talk about when we get to the fourth house. But yeah, I think just luminary type people, like you can bring people into your sphere. You can cast some light on them, and there's definitely a warmth there that I think that, like, you know, who wouldn't love that? And that wasn't braggy at all. I love that the person you're dating reflected that back to you, because it's true, and that's really sweet. Um, let's see, anything else about, oh, I guess I want to talk a little bit about like the ascendant ruler, the ruler of the first house. And it's funny, Diana, that you use the word avatar, because that's the word that I use when I talk about the ruler of the first, and how like that's you. It's basically like your avatar in the chart, or at least the planet that represents you in the chart. And I like to say that's the planet that has responsibility over you. It's responsible for like your life, your health, your wellness, and just like you're guiding you through life. A lot of astrologers talk about how it's this the planet that's steering the ship of your life. Because the first house was traditionally referred to as the helm, which I think Pao mentioned earlier. And so the planet that governs the first, or has responsibility over the first, is steering that ship. And so, yeah, just wanted to note that, like, if you don't have planets in the first house, that's, completely normal and fine. But looking to the ruler of the first house is really going to give you more information about, how that first house energy plays out. And usually, like, I love asking people their SMRs, but I'm always like, okay, but where's the ruler of your first too? Because like, that's really where we get into like, you might be a Pisces rising, but where's that Jupiter, um, and that will also speak a lot to, who you are, where a lot of your energy is focused in this lifetime. And can also speak a lot, to your body and your body's composition, and even just like your general vitality and health. Like, I'm a detrimental, meaning the ruler of my first house is in detriment. And I have health challenges, and, learning about astrology and about essential dignities and all of that, really help put into perspective, like, why I have some of the challenges that I do. And I think part of that is like, the planet that rules my chart is in a somewhat weakened position in the sign that it's in. And that doesn't mean that everyone is going to have health problems if you have planet or the rule of your first in detriment or anything. But it does speak to, the condition of that planet might speak to your conditions as well. Yeah. Do you guys have anything to add about the ascendant ruler?
I mean, my ascendant ruler is in my first house. So I feel like on a personal level, I'm just like this, it contributes, like the combination of having the ruler of my ascendant in my first house with Uranus on the ascendant. It is extraordinarily hard for me to be anyone other than who I am. Like trying, like, even if I know that it would be strategically good for me to like pretend to kind of be not myself in a given context, it's extraordinarily challenging.
It's impossible. Yeah.
Like it, like literally, like it causes me that, like, in terms of causing health problems, me being inauthentic to my actual needs and wants and, I don't know, personhood, that's what causes my health problems. A lot of, or like maybe not causes, strongly contributes to health problems for me.
Yeah. I always say when people have ruler of the first and the first, it's like you are that planet incarnated. Like,
yeah, it's a more intense avataring.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the ruler of my first house, and this will be probably a good segue into the fourth house, is or I don't know if we're doing the fourth house or something.
Yeah. Oh, we're gonna do the seventh, but yeah.
Okay, eventually we'll talk about the fourth.
Yeah.
But yeah, the ruler of my first house is Venus in Leo in the fourth house, and it's actually the planet that makes the closest aspect to my ascendant. It squares my ascendant, and so I think that's another thing that people can look at if you don't have any first house planets. Obviously look at where your first house ruler is, but if there are any other planets that are making like close aspects to your ascendant, especially if it's like a square or an opposition, a trine, maybe even a sextile, I think that can also kind of just speak to like your first house in your ascendant.
Definitely. Yeah, because that like planets that are making tight aspect to the ascendant have a direct influence on you, on the life of the native, of the person. It's like they're casting some light or throwing some energy your way, whether that's supportive or, more challenging, what have you. It's still gonna show up pretty loudly, especially, yeah. Cool. Yeah, and I'm excited to talk about the fourth house too, but I want to I want to talk about the seventh and sort of the axis between the first and the seventh. So yeah, let's talk about the seventh house and some traditional significations of the seventh. I think it's, the first house is you, it's the self, it's the identity. The seventh house is other people. I wouldn't say everyone else, but it's literally like the partner, the relationships that you form with other folks. Um yeah, Diana, seventh house person. Another
Yeah.
seventh house things. Yeah.
Yeah, so I talk about seventh house, like the seventh house is people that you would have like like a notable one-to-one relationship with, including relationships that could be contractual in nature. Um, where there's like a like one-to-one relationships where you can kind of define them in more definitive ways. So like vague acquaintances might not land in the seventh house, but people that you're just like, yeah, that person is my friend, like that's my close friend, that is my arch enemy, like my nemesis. And also like depending on the circumstances, it could be someone like the person who's coming over to fix your fridge,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, but they are, people who have a clear role in your life, like one to one. Yeah. So as like an opposite to the first house, this is always happening along a sign axis. And sign pairs can seem oppositional, but they always have a core shared quality or shared concern between them. And so that first house, seventh house axis can help you better comprehend your values, what matters to you, that kind of thing, through the lens of relating.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Relating. That's a good word. Excuse me. Other people you might find in the seventh, which comes up a lot when I'm talking about astrology, is clients. Seventh
Mm-hmm.
house is where you would find your clients. And yeah, again, any sort of one-on-one work or relationships that you have with folks. And of course, relationships. You fall in
Yeah.
love, that person or those people will be in the seventh house. Because of course you can fall in love with more than one person. Poly folks exist. So yeah, all of those relationships are in the seventh. Um, Diana and I both have Jupiter in the seventh house. It's my chart ruler. Um, and so I definitely consider myself like a seventh house person. It's when I say that, I just mean like relationships are everything to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like my life literally runs on
Yep.
relationships and forming partnerships with folks. Hence like this podcast, even like I don't do solo episodes. It's like I'm a partnership person. I like to do things with other people. And again, it's my chart ruler, Jupiter, the planet that represents me, is on the descendant in my chart. It's setting on the west, and so everything that has to do with like me is literally projected onto like other people. And of course I have to be very conscious of literally projecting things onto people. um but and also I just found it funny when I did my human design, found out I was a projector. I was like, oh, duh. That makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I mean, relationships are everything. And when I say that, also I mean that like things, like when my life is like stagnant, it's usually meeting someone or forming a relationship with someone that will kind of like cause action to happen in my life. So whether it be, I'm just thinking back to when I was 23 in my 12th house year, and I was like unemployed for basically like 7 or 8 months, and I was very depressed and lonely and blah blah blah. um, I knew that my first house year was coming because thank God I had astrology, so I was kind of holding out for that. And part of that whole process, I had my Jupiter return right before my first house year started, right before I turned 24. And the Jupiter return in my seventh house um, was like a relationship that I had made years prior at an internship, um, ended up with like him getting me a job at this like ad agency that I ended up working at for a couple years. But it was like that relationship that I formed years prior led me into a situation where I was like forming even more relationships, and it got me a job where I, just like kind of introduced me to a shit ton more people, because that job was at an office that had like 1,000 people. It was basically like going to college because everyone was hot and young and smart and cool. But yeah, so that like led me into forming even more relationships, and the people that I met at that job I'm still very close with, years and years later. So it's all literally all my life is just all relationships basically. um and when we talk about the the 10th house, I'll talk about I have my mutual reception with the ruler of my all the rulers of my angles basically are angular and receiving each other. But yeah, when it comes to the seventh, it really is, about partnership. And again, it's not necessarily relationship. I mean, sorry, it's not necessarily romantic relationships. It's just relationships. And like Diana said, this can be like your best friends. My seventh house is Virgo. I I have a lot of like Virgo people in my life, whether it be, moons or risings, a lot of Virgo suns in my life. Um, when I was in my my first house year, ruled by Jupiter in the seventh, I started dating a guy that had, I think, 4 or 5 planets in Virgo.
Huh?
Um, so, so yeah, it's like, you can, the seventh house, I think, really the sign and then the planets, if you have planets there, will really describe the type of people you tend to attract into your life, and form relationships with. So for me, I'm surrounded by Mercurials. Like I love me a Gemini, I love me a Virgo. They're all over me. What about you guys? What about you, pal? Like you have an empty seventh, right? Besides
I do.
Pluto.
I just have Pluto there.
Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, interesting hearing you both describe the seventh house as someone who doesn't have seventh house placements. Because for me, I, it's really like hard for me to do things in collaboration. As maybe it is also just like because I have such a strong first house. Like I've been drawing tarot cards recently like crazy. They're like screaming at me that I need to like delegate more work, that I need to collaborate more because I can end up taking on too much. um as for dating or just relationships in general, yeah, I have Scorpio in my seventh house. I date and attract both platonically and romantically so many Scorpio placements. Like it's pretty insane. I'm dating a Scorpio rising right now, and the funny thing is he has a lot of seventh house placements. He has three planets in Taurus. And so yeah, and obviously I'm a Taurus rising and a Taurus moon, so
That's hot. My ex actually is a Taurus rising with like a couple planets in the first, but yeah, his seventh house is Scorpio, and I just fit right in there, all my Scorpio planets. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Awesome. And yeah, Diana, yeah, your Jupiter there in Cancer. And it's in a pretty tight opposition to your Saturn, right?
Yeah, it's in an opposition to my Neptune Saturn conjunction. And it's also in like a sort of loose trine to my Mars Pluto in Scorpio. Which is interesting because as you were talking, I was just like, do I get a lot of Cancerians? And what I actually attract the most of, like as I'm like scrolling through my Rolodex of like friends and lovers, I have a lot of Mars and Cancer people in my life, or have had. Whatever, the density changes over time. But yeah, I also am super, like, for me, like, people with prominent Jupiters are really attractive to me. And people who, it's like, I love Pisces risings. Like, I love you all so much. Um, yeah. I've been really blessed in terms of like my one-on-one friendships. I've been really blessed also in terms of my romantic relationships. In that, like, I've had, I can genuinely say that I have been genuinely in love with, and genuine been like had people be genuinely in love with me, like reciprocally, multiple times. And I know that's not something that everybody gets to experience. And I consider that to be like a Jupiterian blessing. Although I also have Chiron in the 7th house. So there's a lot of ouch that goes along with that too. But yeah. Yeah. I mean, and Jupiter also rules both of my luminaries.
And you have the
and
mutual reception too.
and they're in mutual reception, but they're averse to each other. Right. So it's like Moon in the 12th, Jupiter in the 7th. So they don't form any classical aspects with each other, but they are like partile averse, like they're both at 9 degrees. So it's been an interesting process of like, I don't know, sorting out the methods of available indirect communication between those points in my chart and how they reflect in terms of my relationship, as I like to call it.
Gosh, I wish I even had relationship.
Oh my God, Kirah, don't even start. Don't even
Well,
start.
I'm always amazed by your like hearing about your relationships, whether they be platonic or romantic, and like the various successes. Because I'm like, I don't think I can say that I've been like mutually like loved and like loved and cared for, at least romantically. Yeah, I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting. I'm hopeful that my 7th house year will bring some more balance into my life in terms of relationships, but or at least romantic relationships. I've had good friendships. I have people in my life that I love a lot. But yeah, I'm like, oh wow. I think what it is like, strong ruler of the 1st, and then like really lovely Jupiter in the 7th opposite it. It's like, yeah.
I mean, sometimes I feel allergic to relationship too, right? Like sometimes I'm just like, I need to I need to be completely aromantic and asexual in order to actually like accomplish what I want to accomplish. Or situations where I just kind of tumble too deeply into being in relationship and end up neglecting other aspects of my life. So it's like that opposition of like two strongly placed planets angularly. Like sometimes they're like, it's like they're dancing with each other, and sometimes they're like fighting over my time and energy.
Yeah, it's like a seesaw sometimes.
Yeah, or tug of war.
Yeah, tug of war. Yeah. Oppositions, man.
Yeah. I learn a lot, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Like never not learning. It's really exhausting.
I find folks like me who have the ruler of the 1st and the 7th, which is automatically going to put it in in detriment, that we tend to learn through contrast, and learn through like, okay, I have this type of relationship and it like crashes and burns. So it's like, I'm going to swing in the complete opposite direction. Just to see, like, it's you learn through like, yeah, kind of extremes in a lot of ways. But yeah, I don't know what else do I have to say about the 7th.
I think looking to the sevens to understand what is important for you in relationship is really key. Like not just like what is inside the seventh house and what the sign of the seventh house is, but where is the ruler of the seventh house and what is it up to? And can you give yourself permission to allow what that collection of like astrofacts says to actually support you in making healthy relationship decisions?
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, like the ruler of the first is you, so the
Mhm.
ruler of the seventh is the partner or the people that you partner with,
Mhm.
and so you can look to that planet and its house position, its aspects to all of that, its condition, and kind of get a better idea of as to like the type of people that would be like best for you to partner with, honestly. Yeah, I've like personally, I have like, this eighth house Venus situation, where I find when I like lean into that, like I'm not really, those aren't really the partners that are good for me in the long run. But when I lean into like the Mercury Jupiter type of people, I click so much more, and it's like way more compatible with like what my actual wants and needs are, not so much like this like nodal bullshit that my Venus pulls me into. It's like patterning that I do not need to keep up.
Mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you for mentioning that. The ruler of the seventh is really important. And honestly, like you can play around if you haven't met like your person or a person yet, like kind of thinking about, where the seventh house ruler is as like a potential how you might meet this person or the
Mhm.
spaces that you might meet them in.
Yep.
So say the ruler of your seventh is in the fifth, like you might meet them at work, or if the ruler of the seventh is in the ninth, you could meet them traveling or abroad or at college,
I actually have a really good example of
Yeah,
that I
please.
would love to share. So, one of my exes, um, I met him like so. One, he was a professor. He was not my professor. He was a professor, to be clear. Um, he was a professor. Jupiter gets associated with professors, right? I met him when I was working at a special collections and rare books library at a university. Um, and so um, the ruler of my seventh house is in the 12th house, and a special collections and archives, like rare books library, is basically a prison for special books.
Mhm.
Because you can't take the books outside of like the reading facilities, and like you can't actually go into the stacks yourself if
I
you're a
bet it's like
patron.
kind
You
of
have to have someone else retrieve them.
secluded. Yeah.
Yeah. On top of that, my Jupiter also is in charge of my Mercury, and Mercury is in charge of my sixth and ninth houses. The sixth house is like, being in a position of service. So I was working at the library and I was providing this person that I ended up dating with the materials. Like I was serving him, I was literally serving
Mm,
him like his research materials. And ninth house, it was happening at a university.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah. I mean, there's some other factors to that relationship that also plug into that interplay of planets that I'm not going to go into, but yeah.
Astrology's too real.
Yeah, it's too real sometimes.
Yeah, and I would really encourage like folks to like when you're thinking about the ruler of your seven, like to really like dig deep on like what that planet significations are.
Mhm.
And like for me, the ruler of my seventh house is Mars, and I have Leo Mars in the fourth house. And I was finding like it was actually another person on astrology Twitter, Jessica Irene, who was like tweeted like I think in December, it was like something like the ruler of your seventh house can indicate the kind of professions that you tend to attract romantically. And
Wasn't
I
that about
like,
like the term lord of the ruler of the seventh?
was it the term lord of the ruler?
I
It
think
might have been.
so.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
No,
you're
no,
right.
no, that's
Laura
okay.
remembers better than I am. But so in my case, I have Leo Mars in Mars's term and decan. So
Yeah.
it's a very, very strong, just like Mars, Mars, Mars. And I like kind of half joke, half seriously, like quote tweeted it saying like, yeah, can my like ruler of my seventh please stop bringing me military guys and start bringing me me like, you know, someone who's actually like protesting for like anti-capitalism, and like literally in a week I like met someone who is doing that, just that. But
That's
yeah,
amazing.
Love that.
so for folks out there, you know, as you're thinking about the rollover 7, like just think of the various significations of it, right? Like Mars, like, yeah, Mars could be military guys, or Mars could be people fighting for the revolution.
Like
Hell
Antifa.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. It could be surgeon, it can be a butcher, it can be a lot of things. Yeah, I also have the ruler of my 7th in its own term. And I, you know, definitely, and it's like the ruler of my 7th is exactly conjunct my midheaven. So I'm always like a career oriented person is like hot as hell to me, especially someone that's just like really, really good at what they do. And I have dated so many writers. I've dated so many fucking writers. You know, yeah, ruler of the 7th in its own term, Mercury in its own term, and on the midheaven. And yeah, I attract a lot of Mercurials, and I attract a lot of Mercurials who write and who teach and do various communication type stuff. So we'll see if I find another one soon. All right. Do you guys have any other thoughts about the 1st house, 7th house axis? Yeah, I was just like, you know, look to see if there's any aspect between the ruler of the 1st and the 7th. Stuff like that. Yeah. I think we can move on to our other angular houses. Let's talk about the 4th house. Pal's specialty. Where most of Pal's planets are. So the 4th house, traditional significations, the home, the family, the family of, yeah, it could be family both of origin or, you know, chosen. It has a lot to do with ancestry as well as like heritage. And I like to say it's just like has a lot to do with how you grew up, how you were raised. It's also land, so like the land that you're from, whether that means like your family's from there or like you're, you know, you were born there, the land that you grew up around. Yeah, what else? What do you guys have? Oh, foundation. I just like to say the 4th house is like your general, it's your foundation, which can be, you know, your foundation isn't necessarily like static, you know, it can change over time and take on new forms too and be sort of like rebuilt sometimes as well. But yeah, what are you guys' thoughts about the 4th, just traditionally speaking? Or not traditionally, just in terms of like significations of the 4th?
I think the 4th traditionally was called the subterraneous place, like it is just kind of like that lowest place in the chart. And when we talk about the angles being pivotal moments, like I oftentimes like to think about the sun's like trajectory through the sky. And when the sun's in the 4th house, like that really is like that switch into like literally the next day. Like I have sun in the 4th house, and so I was born at 11:15. Like I was almost born. Like the next day, had I been born like 45 minutes later. And so I think, yeah, the 4th house, and I think those are good, like the basic significations. I think it's really fascinating to me that in like electional and horary astrology, the 4th house signifies the end of the matter. And so like the 4th house and what ruler of the 4th house is like also good to look at in terms of just like how will this question or this event or situation end. And so I think about that too. Yeah, the 4th house is like where we came from. It is our roots. It is like that. But I think what's inevitably tied to that too is like legacy, like what is going to come after us, after this life.
Yeah, I love that. Another thing that tends to come up a lot in the 4th house that you don't really see a lot is death. Death is also, again, it's the end of the matter, right? Just as Pao said. So, and it is the lowest place in the chart. And when we die, we usually like, not everyone, but oftentimes we're being put like in this very low place, right?
Literally put in the ground.
Underground. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because like 4th house activations for me, I had like the death of 2 family members in like a week, my 4th house perfection year. And yeah, it's just, I want to bring that up because oftentimes we do see death in the fourth, as opposed to the eighth. The eighth tends to be more of like the stuff you get from a death, inheritance and stuff like that. It's not always just that, but yeah, I just wanted to add that in as a signification. Yeah, Diana, do you have thoughts about the fourth?
I mean, I guess like one thing that I like to talk about with the fourth, which is also something that I talk about with the IC, whether or not it's in the fourth house, like the IC being the midnight point, the Mimkolai, like the middle of the night. Um, like I like to talk about or like use the metaphor of like a tree and how, um like an oak tree that becomes really magnificent and old and huge. Like at one point it was an acorn that set down a root, and where that acorn roots out, like where it starts to grow, actually determines the rest of the life of that oak tree. Like if that oak tree tries to take root in a place that will not support its thriving, it will impact how that tree like exists, right? Or even it's like there are certain species of trees that in ideal conditions become super huge, but like, you get really close to the timberline and they become like very like scraggly, tough, tiny trees instead of like huge, big, will go up in a wildfire trees, right? Like there's different ways that the same seed can end up growing. And that can be a way to kind of understand the fourth house in the IC of just like these are aspects that are like contributing factors to your beingness and to your life that you cannot change, but you can adapt around, if you need to, if and when you need to. uh yeah. It's
Yeah.
also a very private part of the chart, right? Like, I think, Pao, you can probably speak to this better as somebody with a collection of things in the fourth house, where you can see a differentiation between, what is willingly shared and then like the depths, like what's, it's like maybe people get to see the tip of the iceberg, but the fourth house is like, can be the body of the iceberg beneath the water that is not immediately perceptible.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like yeah, it's the conditions that you were raised in. And like when you're a kid, you don't have much say over that at all. So it is like that foundational piece, that you can't change that foundational piece, but you can, especially when we're in like fourth house activations or fourth house transits, kind of dig even deeper into that and sort of like decide for yourself like what pieces that you want to keep in terms of like your foundation when you're building one of your own. Say you're building your own family or your own home space. There's going to be the patterning, from your early life or your early circumstances, but you don't have to replicate all of that, right? um yeah. Yeah, fourth house is a difficult one. um
It's
it's hard.
so
Yeah, why don't we have our fourth house expert talk a little bit about it?
Oh my God. I have four planets in the fourth house. So I have Leo in my fourth house. And I have my sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars all there, and my IC. And I remember when I first looked at my chart and I saw all of those planets in the fourth house in Leo, and I remember just being like, that doesn't make sense to me, because I actually like a lot of the just kind of cookie cutter descriptions of like having so much in the fourth house is that, oh, like home and family are really important to you. And for me, I was just like, this makes no sense. Like, I am not close with my family at all. I actually grew up in like a really, really abusive home, and I have a very complicated relationship with my family of origin. And so, like, I had to really, really kind of dig deeper on like what does the fourth house exactly mean, and it's something I still feel like I'm exploring and like trying to just like really understand, because there's just I have so many planets there. Everything like in my chart revolves back to this fourth house, and it's come up in some like my heritage is super important to me. Like I'm part of like an indigenous tribe in the Philippines. That's something that's like always really been important to me. Like going back home to the Philippines is like something I do every 4 years that I need to do pretty frequently. A lot of like my career and life's work goes back to like I do a lot of immigration organizing. I do a lot of like organizing around just like land and housing and like some of this other stuff around the fourth house. But I think another way that the fourth house like comes up for me is, you know, as Diana said, the fourth house is our private life and our private world. And one of the big kind of turning points in my life was reading this book, and I'm going to warn people, this is it's written by an evangelical Christian, so I don't recommend it so much, but it did positively change my life. But it's called Ordering Your Private World, and the whole premise of the book is that you have to like just kind of really kind of get your private like world and foundation and your soul like kind of like in check in order to kind of like live like a really really strong and steady outward world. That there are so many people out there who live very quote unquote successful lives, but as soon as like something goes wrong, like it all kind of crumbles because they don't have their foundation set. And it's just kind of something like, even though I don't identify as an evangelical Christian anymore, like it's something that I've just like been living by for like the past like almost 10 years now. Like it is really really important for me to like constantly like be like reflective and introspective and just like really really like making checking in on myself constantly and just like really seeing like all this stuff that I'm doing out in the community, like in my life, like whatever, like what does it all kind of mean, like what, you know, how is it all kind of rooted in just kind of like a deeper purpose that is kind of linked with like my ancestors. And then I think on that note, another thing is like this past year I've been like finally doing like a little bit more like ancestral like healing and reparation type work and or veneration type work, and found that to be like incredibly healing for me. So like for people who have like strong fourth house placements, like I would recommend even just kind of looking into that.
Yeah, I love, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, Pao, do you feel like it would feel more like affirming and accurate to say, rather than like if you have a lot of stuff in the fourth house, family is important, more like if you have a lot of the stuff in the fourth house, like family and lineage are more influential within your life than maybe the average person? So like influential instead of important.
Yeah, I think that would be that would that would have made more sense for me, because like
Yeah.
even despite unfortunately growing up like in a not good home and
Mhm.
family environment, it is playing a really like it's, you know, it's affected me for like better or worse. And I've found that like I've had to go to therapy and I have to really really put in the work to heal from like a lot of those childhood wounds, because there's just like no way I can like go for it. It is just like inevitably going to affect like my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like using the word important implies that it's a priority, but influential like gives space to just be like, well, even if I didn't choose to prioritize it, it made itself very
Yeah.
significant.
Yeah, because if you have a
So,
stellium, it's like there's like so many different house topics, like the planets that rule, like probably 8 different, or at least like 4 or 5 different houses in your chart, all come back down
7.
to,
Oh, 6.
I'm like, the sun is only one,
But like
but everyone
Mercury,
else, yeah,
Mars, and
so
Venus each
7
have 2. So there's like, yeah, so there's like 7 sectors of your chart that all end up
come back to
like,
the fourth.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then ruled by, you know, a Leo sun in its own sign, all the things. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I really like the point that both of you made about the fourth house being so much about our private selves and our privacy. And I find that fourth house people, whether it be like a sun or a stellium, excuse me, tend to, you know, it's like they come alive at home or in their private lives. Like they're not necessarily the most public, out there, like trying to gain so much public prominence, which also kind of talk about like diurnal versus nocturnal charts and type people. But yeah, it's like so much of their world and their life comes alive in their own home spaces, or when they can feel like comfortable to express those things. And it's just like, it's not for everyone. Like your entire, like your Leo stellium is not for everyone. It's not that like it doesn't come out, but I would imagine that like your home life is so colorful and like vibrant, and yeah, like there's a lot of activity that happens more in your private life as opposed to like, out for the whole world to see. And as someone who has the ruler of the fourth house, as far as it can be from the IC, literally exactly conjunct the midheaven, and therefore in detriment. Yeah, like family home stuff is weird for me because I like, it's not a priority. I'll say that. And I feel really guilty about that. I've been made to feel really guilty about that too, because like to my mom, for instance, like family is everything to her. She grew up with three sisters, but all of her aunts and uncles were basically like cousins to her. So my grandfather had 16. Sorry, my grandfather was the first of 16 kids. My great grandparents had 16 kids, and so by the time my grandfather was having his daughters, my mom and my aunts, like he was still having new brothers and sisters. And so my mom and my aunts, like they grew up with this humongous family, and family is just like so important in my family. We have an average of about 5 new babies a year. um 2020 we didn't have as many, but we definitely, like, for a while we were having like 4, 5, 6, 7 babies a year. One year we had 2 sets of twins. Like we just have we have such a big family. On this is just my mom's side. My dad's side is also pretty big, but not as huge. My dad was 1 of 9. He had 7 kids. Like a bunch of my siblings have kids. So family is humongous, and and literally like the ruler of my fourth house is in Sag. Like, yeah, there's lots of them. Lots of us, I should say. But I've always wanted to get out the house. I always wanted to individuate. And I don't identify with my family. Like I love them so much. But there's a lot there. Right. And I'm just like not necessarily, I guess I'll put it this way. Like my dad has wanted to like leave Pennsylvania for forever. He wants to move out here to California. Like he used to live out here in the 50s, like kind of where I'm living now, sort of fulfilling a dream of his to come out here. But he's always wanted to move to a different climate, but like literally I cannot ever imagine my mom leaving, because like her life is the family. Like that's her social life, is like her cousins. Those are always been her best friends, her aunts and uncles and cousins. So yeah, for her, family's really important. But I got out as soon as I could, and like I don't ever see myself like going back long term. And yeah, another part is just like my private isn't very private. It's like I'm a Scorpio, I'm private in some ways, but like I'm pretty much an open book when it comes to people like asking me about things that might be considered like private. The ruler of my fourth is as public as it can be, exactly conjunct the midheaven. So private isn't so private for me a lot of the times. And you know, my very Scorpio parents also don't like that. But yeah, so I really like the note about the fourth house and privacy, because I find that when I get clients sometimes that don't know a lot of astrology, and they're like, fourth house type people, and they're like, I don't like people. I'm a Sag. I have 5 planets in Sag, but like I don't identify with what I'm reading online about Sag. And it's like, yeah, well, all your Sag is hidden. It's private. It's for you. It's
Actually,
not for
this
everyone
brings up
else.
something that's really interesting, which is that, we were talking about how like the angular houses tend to be really loud, but the fourth house is really loud, but like screaming internally.
Yeah.
instead of screaming externally.
Yeah.
Right. Like the fourth house is absolutely the quietest of the angular houses, I would say.
Yeah, because it is so like, yeah, foundational and internal in that way.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Any other thoughts about the fourth?
Mm. Really watch
Land.
out for fourth house transits. It's
Oh.
like,
Oh yeah, that's something
man,
actually.
like Uranus moving through my fourth house. Like I was literally moving like every other year.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm still not done doing that, but
Yeah.
also like my malefic out of sect, who is in domicile, rules my fourth house and my IC. So
Mm-hmm.
Fourth house perfection years are also really interesting, right? Because that's age 27.
Mm-hmm.
If one of our fourth house years, that's also the beginning of Saturn return for like many
Mhm.
people. And it's really interesting what kind of big life changes tend to happen. I got married that year, which I think is very, very like fourth house. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, yeah, fourth house years, I call it the homecoming, and especially 27. But that's something that happens like a lot when people turn 27 as they move back home for a certain period of time. Or, even if they're not moving in with their parents, it's like there's this return to home that happens like a lot. Like I know so many people who moved back home, including myself at 27. And I like to say that because like there's something wrong with that, like having to go back home and sort of recalibrate, because that's part of it. The fourth house year, it's sort of this rerouting, um, so that you can figure out where to pivot from, like where you kind of have to stabilize yourself in some ways to figure out where to go next. And it's important at 27, especially because we get not just a fourth house year, but your nodal reversal. You also get your progressed lunar return. That all sort of like preps you, I think kind of like points you in the right direction for your Saturn return, for the Saturn return work, I guess. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that fourth house years. They are very important. And yeah, another thing I just want to bring up is I mentioned it before, but like land, find things like real estate, anything having to do with like purchasing, or like not even purchasing, but things having to do with land and property and things like that are also fourth house matters. Um, yeah, I think we're ready to pop over to the 10th.
Mhm.
Okay, so the 10th house, traditional significations. Oh, sorry. One thing I want to say about the fourth before we do that is just that the IC, which is that nadir point, nadir, the lowest point, basically the lowest point in the sky underneath the earth, that planets get before they start to rise towards the east. So that tends to be around midnight where the sun gets to that point. And I just wanted to note that that's not always in the fourth house. That point can move between the third house, fourth, and fifth. And sometimes, depending on, if you were born super close to one of the poles, it could even go into the second or sixth house, but that's pretty rare. So yeah, I just wanted to note that too, that your IC could be in the third house or the fifth house. And it's basically like bringing topics, fourth house type topics to that house. So like, for example, when people have the IC in the third, it's like, we talk about this in the third house, ninth house episode too, but like it could be that, your neighborhood is like very, very important to like your home life too. Um, Things, that's just an example, but we're sort of bringing topics related to the fourth house to the third or the fifth if your IC is in one of those houses. So I wanted to note that because we'll talk about that too with the MC as well. So the 10th house, um, the 10th house is the most visible part of the chart. It's, when planets are in the 10th house, it's usually like they're directly above us in terms of like in the sky. So it's like 12 o'clock noon, you look up, the sky is like super, super there. It's visible, casting shadows, all of that. And it has traditional significations. It's like your reputation, what you're known for. you at the sort of like height of your life, right? It's the highest point in the chart. So we're talking about you at your most visible. So that tends to correlate to things like your career, your vocation, your reputation, the positions and the roles that you take on. So like, you know, the titles that you take on, the hats that you wear. Um, yeah. Diana, do you have things to say about the 10th house?
No, you're basically covering all of them. Just to like bring in the midheaven, right? Which in quadrant-based houses creates the border, like this initiates the shape of the 10th house. But in whole sign houses, just like with the IC, it moves, right? It can be in the 10th house, the 9th house, or the 11th house, or like in extreme circumstances, you might see it in the 8th house.
Or the 12th, yeah.
Or the 12th in, again, extreme circumstances, very rare. And one of the things that I really love about whole sign houses is that differentiation between the 10th house and the midheaven. Because like the 10th house, like no matter what, just like even just visually in a circle chart, it's just like whoop, right up there. But the midheaven kind of moving off axis from like the zodiacal circle, it's like, what your career is might not be what your capital W work in the world is. And having that movable midheaven facilitates like an inherently anti-capitalist reading for folks who do have like the midheaven not inside the 10th house. Not to say that if you have the midheaven in the 10th house, you're a capitalist. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But allowing that point to not be chained to the 10th house makes it easier to like kind of discuss the differences between, what is maybe the most important contribution your presence has in the world versus what your what you quote unquote like do for a living might be.
Yeah.
But yeah, the 10th house, I don't feel like I have anything more to add.
No, I love that. Yeah, it's important because like not everyone has a career, right? Not everyone is like a career person. Not everyone will have a job in their life or and a job is different from career too and vocation. And 18-year-olds don't have don't have careers usually necessarily. So yeah, it's important to note that it's not just career. I like to say it's what you're known for. And yeah, before I get into that, I want to know what Pao has to say.
Yeah, I think just to add, I think one of the ways that the 10th house was referred to by Hellenistic astrologers was praxis. And I think that's like really interesting to think about too, especially with the 10th house following the 9th house, right? Like the 9th house often can signify like what we've learned, and that could be in formal education, but it could be all different kinds of trainings as well. But so like can various other beliefs and spiritual practices and all that kind of stuff falls in the 9th house. And then we like transition into this 10th house, which was known as praxis. And it's, to me, yeah, unfortunately we live in a society where oftentimes that can come out in our career, but it's not necessarily a career. I think it really is like, how do we live out and embody what it is that we've learned, what kind of theories or beliefs or worldviews we hold, like how do we actually kind of put that into practice?
I love that. Yeah. Yeah, and with that, so like the sign on the 10th house can describe the type of things you'd be known for. For example, I have Sag in my 10th house. Like I am known for like communicating this, or I would say more like just disseminating knowledge, right? That's like what we're doing right now. And then planets there in the 10th house or close to the midheaven will also, to me, they speak more to the roles, like the sort of hats that you wear. So I have Mercury on my midheaven, and literally like I'm known as someone who communicates shit, right? Like that's what I'm doing right now.
Literally on a podcast.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I write and I teach and I do so much mercurial stuff, and that's literally like the most visible parts of me is my Mercury, and when I'm Mercurying, and yeah, it's interesting because it's like my Mercury is it has accidental dignity by being on the midheaven, and it's in its own term, which is great, but everything else about it is like kind of difficult. It's in detriment. It's contrary to sect. It's pretty slow. My progressed Mercury does station direct in a couple months, which is really exciting. But yeah, it's like it's difficult for me because it's like I'm kind of expected to Mercury because that's what is the most visible. Like that's what I do. That's my role is to Mercury. But it's so hard. It's so hard for me to Mercury, which is why I wear this Mercury talisman. But especially right now, it's been the South Node is like exactly conjunct my Mercury. It was partile like a day or two ago. So lately it's just been like extremely hard to Mercury, meaning like even talking, I talk all day. I'm on Clubhouse all day. Like I'm talking to people all the time, whether it's on the phone or FaceTime or email, whatever. But lately I've just been like, I just want to listen. Like I can't, I can't talk anymore. I can't write. Like just thinking of like a title for this talk I'm giving. It's been weeks and I still can't do it because it's just so hard with this South Node transit. But anyway, yeah, it's like I just wanted to note that planets there will tend to speak to the type of things you're known for. It can be pretty literal sometimes. Whereas the sign more speaks to like the environment and sort of more, yeah, things more, yeah, the style. That's a good one. Yeah. Do you want to speak a little bit about work your angles? Because I feel like that's a good thing to talk about here.
Yeah, that's actually something I was going to mention, which is like, so I have this little like miniature astro aesthetics consult that I like to do with people, called Work Your Angles, which is like it came out of like I had this dream in 2019. It was like the winter of 2019. Was it 2019 or was it still 2018? Whatever. Time doesn't matter anymore.
It does not.
But like I had this dream that was just like, about walking your ascendant through your midheaven. Like that's the best way to describe it. But it's like whenever like your midheaven and your 10th house, and the sign or signs plural that are associated with those, and the planets that are in charge of those signs, like that can tell you a lot about like how it makes sense for you to show up in the world, like not just like the energy you're embodying, but literally like how you're dressing, how you are presenting your, like if you're on Instagram, like the aesthetic of your Instagram, the aesthetic of your website, that kind of stuff. And that's one thing that you can do even with your own chart. It was just like, what's interesting about the ascendant in the midheaven or the first house and the 10th house is like they often form a square to each other. Like the first and the 10th automatically form a square to each other. Your ascendant and your midheaven may or may not square each other depending on other factors, but that tension can sometimes mean that, if you're really comfortable with your ascendant and just showing up as your rising sign, it can feel challenging to engage with the necessary growth required to also embody your 10th house and your midheaven. But if you do that and you do it on purpose, like it makes it much easier for you to show up for whatever your work, what you consider your work in the world to be. And it's not getting rid of your ascendant. It's not replacing your ascendant with your midheaven or your 10th house. It's like giving your midheaven / 10th house permission to adjust the styling of your ascendant to like, contribute to the outfit, so to speak. Yeah. And I think that can be like a really nourishing way to engage with that combination of angularities.
Yeah. It was great. I had one of the consults. It was awesome. And yeah, I mean, it helped me like figure out how to like mix the Pisces with the Sag basically, and not because like the Sag is the more visible part. Pisces is me. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard. It's helpful for me, and it's helpful for me to like have other people work on my design shit for me, because I need it reflected back to me, because I have a hard time just like orienting myself. Um, Ruler of the first and detriment. I'm just like, you do it. Like you can see me better than I can see me. Um, so yeah, I love that. That's that offering that I don't know if you're not still doing it, are you? Or
I am still doing it.
you
It's
are?
just like my books get filled really quickly. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's possible. It's
Yeah.
possible to get one.
Yeah, it is possible.
Easy? No, but possible, yes. Um, yeah, Pao, do you have thoughts about the 10th, or like your 10th in general?
Yeah, I have plenty thoughts because I'm in a 10th house perfection year. My 10th house is
Oh,
Aquarius, and everything is moving through Aquarius right now, including Saturn, which is my annual lord. And it's interesting though, because yeah, and we talked about how the angles are really loud, the transits are really loud. I feel like it's loud and it's like not. And I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. There's a lot building right now, like for me, that's for sure. And it's like a lot of stuff in just definitely in my career that I can't even like just like talk about yet. I'm definitely in this like mode where I feel like I have to like make space for things, which is why I closed my readings, because like I think I just needed a break, and I just have a feeling like something big stuff's happening. And yeah, there is public stuff. Like I'm on this podcast. Like I've also been asked to like write like a couple of astrology articles, and like that kind of stuff's happening too. But um one thing I really find interesting with perfection years is like I mean I think the 10th house obviously is going to be big stuff around like just career or public life, but I often tend to find, because I've been studying a lot of celebrity charts lately for my other podcast, Pinaystrology, and but I have found that a lot of like the culmination of all of that work in the 10th house tends to actually happen in the 11th house for perfection
Mm.
year. So I am really excited to see what that will bring for me starting in August. um I think my only other thing on the 10th is, so yeah, I don't have any planets in the 10th house, and my midheaven is in my 10th house. And so just like with all the other houses, look at the ruler of that house. So in my case, I have again, I have Aquarius in the 10th house, ruled by Saturn and Sagittarius in my 8th house. And I think that completely tracks. It's like a lot of the work. I work as a labor organizer. Like I work around redistribution of the wealth, so it's like very, very much like trying to deal with other people's money, trying to get these corporations to like give more better paying benefits to their workers.
yeah. That makes so much sense. Yeah. And just like even looking at Aquarius in the 10th in midheaven, it's like, I find that Aquarius, especially in the 10th house, it's like you're known for um, being able to see like systems of oppression, or I would say just systems in general, especially social systems. And like that Aquarius has so much to do with that, like being able to have this perspective on the way things are running, and seeing like who they're working for and who they're not working for. And so being known for that, and then doing it in a space that has a lot to do with the redistribution of wealth and equity and all of that makes a ton of sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
10th house transits. Yeah. I mean, I had Jupiter moving through my 10th in 2019, which was the year that most of my I started to like gain more prominence in terms of my career, which led to be able to go full time in astrology and at the beginning of 2020. But yeah, I mean, that Jupiter transit was like a lot. It was great in that, it helped with advancing my career in a lot of ways, but it was so overwhelming. It was it was a really hard year for me, like just personally and stuff, but um it was great for career. I'll say that. It was really good for career. But I love that you said about like the work in the 10th house being more like realized in the 11th, like the work that you do in the 10th. And I think I totally related to that when you said that, because of Saturn moving through my 10th in, it was like between 2014 and 2017, Saturn and Sag. And during that time, it was like, that was when I was like working in advertising, but I was also really doing a lot of work to solidify my like astro like techniques and just like the ways that I go about doing astrology. And I felt so much pressure to like, you know, the ninth, Saturn through my ninth, just like learning everything I could. Saturn through my 10th was like learning traditional astrology basically, so that I could like kind of ground it into something real. But then Saturn through my 11th was like the first time I started Deep Seekers, which was like the first kind of community thing I did, with like monthly meetups with astrology enthusiasts. And I really started, that's when I merged astrology and community basically, which is like all I do now. So I love that you said that, because that's so real and so true. Like that you can do so much work in the 10th house that might not be, it might not feel so public, but once you get into the 11th, it's like, that's when you can really like share that with other people and like be in community with other people around those 10th house topics.
Yeah, like for me, I've been thinking a lot about my last 10th house, 11th house years, because that's coming up for me now. But like 12 years ago, like a lot of my 10th house really was, I was still in college. I was an ethnic studies major. I was working my very first like social justicey job. So I was really, really just like kind of gaining in that. But it was interesting because in the 11th house years, my final year in college, like I was doing my honors thesis for ethnic studies, and I decided to enter a Filipino beauty pageant for my research project, and then I ended up winning.
Wow.
And so it was really, yeah. And I remember like looking back and first learning about perfections, and I was just thinking like, why did this happen in the 11th house year and not the 10th house year? And to me, it just kind of actually makes a lot of sense that this very kind of public thing would happen. But a lot of it was building up from the 10th house year.
Yeah. And speaking of, like, Diana, do you have any notes about like the MC being in the 11th?
I mean, MC in the 11th.
Do you have that? Am I making that?
No, my midheaven's in the 10th.
Okay, yeah. No, I'm like
Libra in the 10th. No, I'm thinking.
I'm mixing up with your Scorpio placements.
Yeah. No, I can Scorpio stuff. Yeah, but I think like one of the things that I've observed with like clients and friends that have the midheaven in the 11th is like, it's like a combination of things where it's like their communities are like extremely important to them, and like extremely important to like not their identity in an ascendant way, but like their identity in terms of like locating themselves in society way. And it's also really important, maybe not across the board, but for like a lot of the people that are coming to mind right now, like it's important for them to have aspirations. Like it's important for them to have something that they feel like they're moving towards. Like that, like moving towards something specific. Yeah, like having goals, being like a core part of how they structure their sense of reality, which is like one thing that we can think about, like with all of the angles, like they contribute to how you structure your sense of reality, right? Yeah, those would be some of the main things. And then like people with midheaven in the 9th, teachers, teachers, lifelong students, you know, people who just like embody, how do I even put this? Like an eternal curiosity that they will share with others in some way. And it's like, it's not necessarily like the curiosity of Gemini, right? Or like the curiosity of Sagittarius. It's like it's like of life type of thing. It's like understanding become like the process of understanding, like the seeking of understanding, being like really, like if that's not fed, they get depressed. Yeah. My ex has he has the midheaven in the 9th, and he has his Saturn there. So his Saturn return was him
going back to school where he got his undergrad to get his master's, and then through that becoming a teacher at that school and like teaching for that program. So yeah, his Saturn return was all about like, you know, the ninth house, just so much about like being in this like this educational setting and like learning and then becoming the teacher and yeah, lots of ninth house things. And I'm just thinking, I know so many Gemini risings who have, you know, Saturn in the ninth and Saturn return happening in the ninth with the midheaven there. And some are, you know, becoming professional astrologers. Some are going back to school. Like, there's a lot. I mean, yeah, we have a whole episode about the third and the ninth. We can get into that, but just wanted to say that, yeah, if you have your midheaven in a different sign other than the 10th or different house, it's just like bringing those themes to that other house.
It's like it makes those houses more important whenever the midheaven moves into them.
Yeah.
Like it's like it like confers accidental angularity.
Yeah, that's a good way
Like
of
more
putting
maybe it increases the volume on houses that otherwise might not be as loud.
Right. I don't know. I'm trying to think. I'm like, do I know people who have like a lot of fourth house, 10th house oppositions? I feel like that's a more, maybe it's not rare, but I don't see it. I don't see it that much.
Yeah, I don't have any coming to mind. That's
Yeah.
interesting because it's like I see people with like first house, seventh house opposition
Yeah. The fourth, 10th is
constantly.
a weird one. Because it is like public, private, you know, like what you're doing at home versus what you're doing out in the world. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about this nodal transit right now, and I have the north node moving through my fourth, and it's actually the north node is conjunct my IC right now. And I just moved, not just moved across country, but moved into my first apartment that's just mine, that I'm paying for all by myself, and like furnishing it and just trying to make it a home that like,
Nesting.
yeah, and it's stressful in a lot of ways because I've never ever once had a home that felt comfortable and safe and like, you know, like my space. Like it's my first time living by myself again, and I've just never had a good living situation. So it's amazing and then also like stressful to figure out how to make it the best for me, and then also figuring out like what that even means because ruler of the fourth and, you know, in detriment like all the way in the 10th, it's like,
Your
yeah,
home has to serve your work needs.
yeah.
Like that's one way to think about like it's like thinking about the relationship between say like the ruler of the fourth and the ruler of the 10th. It's like the ruler of the fourth ideally should be creating foundations upon which the ruler of the 10th can thrive.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. um and yeah, I mean, I have the mutual reception between those planets too, and they're angular.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's been interesting trying to figure out like how to balance those things. And like, I'm blessed enough to like, I'm in my office right now. I have an office, and that's kind of part of what you were saying. Like I realized like I needed a space to work in my home. Like that's so important. um so yeah, I love that you put it that way. um Anything else about the 10th house we somehow didn't cover? I'm thinking like, um the 10th house is also can represent your boss, like the people that sort of like quote unquote above you in terms of like work and, you know, leaders in whatever field or industry.
There's
One thing that
the
kind of tends, oh, sorry.
go
I
ahead.
think one thing that tends to kind of come up is, and even I personally haven't figured out how to just kind of reconcile this, or where I've landed on this, is the 10th house and 4th house, like which one represents the mother versus the
Yep.
father. And
That's
obviously
what I was
that
about to
one,
say.
that was what you're going to say. That,
That's what I was going to say.
yeah, and you know that, like, I think it's problematic in a lot of ways. Like, one, not everyone has like a mother and a father, right? And we have different kinds of caregivers, and so but yeah, I think it's really interesting that sometimes the 10th house and the 4th house can be like signify our caregiver
Yeah.
type.
Yeah, Bear River was saying something about how, so it's like his like indigenous ancestry is matrilineal, and it's like there is no argument about whose womb you emerge from, like no argument. It's so clear. But whose sperm incites you becoming a fetus, like that's secret. So that's one way that I think about the fourth house, 10th house, where it's like the fourth house, like, who is responsible for the sperm part, like that happens in private. It's very secret. Like, you might not like
even know.
if you're not monogamous, like it's who was it,
Yeah.
right? But there's no argument. Like it's very visible. It's very clear who births you. And so
Which
like that's less
which
about the
puts the
role of
mom,
mother and father in like a social sense, but more in terms of the creation of the baby sense.
right. Yeah. So what you're saying, which is what Bear was saying, is that like it would make sense to put the mother in the 10th house because that is the more
Mhm.
public
Yeah,
parent. Like you're going to be like
it's
attached to
super
your
clear.
mother. Yeah, and as well as opposed to the fourth house is where the father is. And I've also heard that it makes sense because the father, traditionally speaking, of course, was the one with like the land, who owned the land and owned, the property, so that like that legacy could be passed on to the children. But like the father was the one who was like the one who, actually owned it,
Right.
whose name was attached to it, right? um so yeah, and like even like thinking about surnames and last names and how that's passed down through typically the father's line, and how that kind of connects to like the heritage, the lineage of the fourth house too. So that's interesting. But yeah, it can be problematic for the reasons that Pao said. Like not everyone has two parents, not everyone has two parents of different sexes or different genders. And some people were raised by, lots of people. Some people were only raised by one. So it can, use that with a grain of salt, but traditionally speaking, yeah, that tends to be the assignments with the mom and the mother in the 10th and the father in the fourth. That's a good point. Let's see, anything else? I'm trying to think. Oh, 10th house. I wanted to say like folks who have stellium or chart ruler in the 10th or just like major, um, lots of planets there. Um, it might it might be that you are like very career oriented or focused. Um, it also can just be like you're a very visible person and you want to be seen. Like you're, that's something that you crave, is to be seen. Or at least those aspects of you, those planets that are in the 10th, like need to be seen and witnessed. Like if I didn't have anyone to like listen to the shit I said or read what I said, like what would I be doing? Who would I be? It's like, um, yeah, you need an audience if you're a 10th house person in a lot of ways. And it's not always about like performance or anything. Often I see people who have 10th house stelliums or a lot of planets in the 10th, or focus there. It's just that like you want to be seen in your industry or in your profession as like a leader or someone who you just want to be well known within that space. And that makes a ton of sense too. Yeah, do you guys have any notes about that, like people who have a lot of planets there, sort of like a concentration, whether it be chart ruler or sect-light or something?
Yeah, I think a lot of what you just said made sense. Like, I described for me with my fourth house, like having my private world in order is just something that's just gonna like really kind of stabilize like the rest of my life. I know someone who has a 10th house stellium, and in some ways it's kind of like he's like almost a flip where he's kind of going through kind of like a big identity crisis right now because he's just starting to realize like he really hates his job, and he's just kind of like really trying to figure out. He's like constantly posting on social media like these questions on like how do you define success, right? And you could just tell he's like
Yeah.
really going through it. And so that's been just kind of really interesting to watch, like from from afar, just like knowing that he has like 4 planets in Scorpio in his 10th
Mm,
house.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I'm thinking that Virgo stellium I mentioned that I dated, we're still like very, very good friends. And he has like Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, all in the 10th in Virgo. And yeah, I'm just thinking like, he went to Harvard, he went to Harvard Business School, like he's like CFO of this or CEO of this like, startup, and like his life is work. It's also a Virgo. So it's like so much of his life has to do with work. And when we're catching up, it's like always talking about the job and how things are going. And he puts so much of his time and energy into that profession. So
I feel like one of the main things that I would want to say to people who have a predominance of emphasis on the 10th house is taking the time to make sure that you're not overly invested in capitalism's ideas of success and capitalism's ideas of what your career is or should be. And to make sure that you are leaving yourself room to actually be satisfied with what you achieve and what you provide to the world. So that way you don't end up 85 years old, retired, getting ready to die, and being like, what did I just do with my life?
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. To really get clear on what it is that you genuinely value and what you want to be known for versus what you think you should be known for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then like investigating the ruler of the 10th and its placement is going to be really crucial in figuring out what that is. And yeah, like when I'm sure you guys have had plenty of clients come to you being like, I don't know what I want to do, or like what I'm doing, I hate what I'm doing, like what should I be doing in terms of like a career, like a path, vocation. And yeah, I mean, digging into the first, if there's any planets in the 10th and or in the midheaven, but then looking at the ruler too and really getting into that. Like again, the ruler of my 10th is Jupiter in the 7th, and like I'm a client person, like I talk to people for a living. So yeah, that's a big one too. It's like where's the ruler of the 10th? Like sometimes the ruler of the 10th is like in the 4th or in the 2nd or 3rd, and it's like maybe you're not supposed to be this like hugely visible public person. Maybe you're someone that's going to be in a more supportive role for other people or organizations, and you're doing the finances like a boss, you know what I mean? Like doesn't have to be career, doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to be about like having the best LinkedIn profile. Like having, God, what is LinkedIn anymore anyway? Who's on that shit? Yeah. Do you guys have anything else to add around that? No? Are we wrapping up? We're finished with the angulars?
I think we might be.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. Of course, we want to let our listeners know where to find you. Pao, why don't you let us know?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter. That's where I'm most active on. So my username is Pinaystrology. And if you go on there, you can also see the link to my website. Like I said, I don't have readings open right now, but they eventually will be. And if you want to be the first to hear it, follow me on Twitter. I also have 2 astrology podcasts. So one is called Pinaystrology that I co-host with one of my really good friends named Janice Lobo-Sapigao. And then we do things like we look at basically like astrology, pop culture, and like right now we've been doing a lot of celebrity charts. Like later today, we're gonna be recording an episode on SZA, who does have a confirmed time. Yeah, awesome. So I'm really looking forward to that one. And then I also have another astrology podcast called Fixed Astrology Podcast with Mo, who is another person on astrology Twitter, and her username is astrologer. But yeah, and then on that one we don't produce episodes as frequently, but it kind of dives more into just like right now we're doing a series on the decans actually. So
yeah, I'm super excited to get into that because you're both really brilliant, and Mo's like so fucking smart, especially when it comes to like the medieval tradition. And oh God, learned so much from her. So definitely check out both.
and she's so strong on the tarot too. So it's like also it's like really especially helpful with the deck and stuff. So I'm a real big like tarot noob. So
Oh, awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait to get into that. Cool. Thank you. And Diana.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram and Patreon. And my handle in all of those places is Damashena, which there will be a link in the show notes. But if you're listening, it's spelled Ddamascenaa. Yeah, my books get filled pretty quickly, in large part because I don't have a lot of time for client consults right now because of projects that I'm working on. And like my regular clients and my Patreon patrons pretty much always fill up all of the slots that I do add. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I really want to get a reading with you ASAP, like join my Patreon and make sure that Patreon emails go to your inbox. That's like the best way at this point. But yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. Twitter is where I like kind of shit post, and Instagram is where I share things that are maybe more insightful. So choose
Yeah,
your
definitely.
fighter.
Yeah, Diana's Patreon's definitely worth subscribing to. Lots of really, really great content. And Instagram too. You share a lot of really like free, great content on Instagram as well. So follow Diana if you somehow aren't already. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this episode.
Yeah, thank you, Kirah.
Thank you.